Hey guys, it's Charlotte from California Haunts Radio. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is going to be great. If you're into Area 51 or stealth technology, this is the show for you. My guest, Jim Goodall, is an expert in Area 51 and the SR71 Blackbird and the stealth fighter. So sit back, strap in, and enjoy the ride. I'll see you in a few minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Hey, welcome to today's episode of California Haunts Radio. I am so excited. In fact, my name is Charlotte. Before I start getting excited, my name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento. We're 35 strong up and down the state, and we also have people in Washington, Oregon, Nevada, and Washington. I'm sorry I said that already. Hawaii. I am so excited tonight. I have a guest on who I've been looking forward to talking to for a long time. And it goes way back with me because when I was a kid growing up, I was a tomboy. And my dad fed into that. And I remember growing up even, eating my little Lucky Charms. And he had these old die-cast airplane models. And these things were for the Navy because the wings would fold up, And so I had Corsairs, these old Corsairs that I used to play with as a kid. And so it started back then. But what I didn't know till much later was that my dad, after leaving the Coast Guard at the end of World War II, went to work for Boeing in Seattle. And so he had worked on planes. Now, I don't think that they may have been military. I don't know. But he knew airplanes inside and out. So our big thing on the weekends, either go to the end of the runway at the airport here, Sacramento, and watch the planes. And then or before they had all the security stuff now, after 911, walk around the airport and just look at the planes. And he'd tell me all the parts, all the struts, everything on the planes. Or we go at the end of the runway and hang out and watch. Or we go over to McClellan Air Force Base because McClellan was right down the road here. And watch those planes. And then what topped it off was we also were at we had another base here that had all the B-52s here on ready to go. So you couldn't get close to them, but you could get to a certain distance with binoculars and see the real cool B-52 Stratofortresses that were out here. So then that led to every air show, everything like that. So I grew up around planes. I was a plane nut. We crawled all over those things, the C-5 Galaxies and all that stuff. My dad had me crawling all up and down that. In fact, he was very excited because about 11 years ago, just before he passed away, I got the opportunity to fly on a B-29 from Stockton back to Sacramento. And so he was really stoked. In fact, he dropped me off at that airport, and he hurriedly drove back to McClellan and waited for me to land with the video camera in hand. So he was real excited. So I have been playing crazy all my life. And then I took my own team over to Castle Air Force Base for an investigation of their haunted B-29. And what did I see parked in front of Castle Air Force Base? SR71 Blackbird. It was cool. And I remember seeing the SR71 Blackbird at the Lincoln Air Show. And my God, I've never seen a plane blow a flame like that going straight up in the air. At least it seemed like that at the time. Even my father was impressed. The thing practically turned on in and went straight up. You never seen nothing. But then that's when he looked at me and said, well, that's going to be the end of that plane because they're flying it all over and showing people. So it's probably going to be declassified. But I tell you, I grew up around this stuff. And then I had a cousin in the Navy. We would come to San Francisco. If he was in town, he'd take me on personal tours of all the aircraft carriers and everything. So, I grew up around this stuff. So I'm really excited to talk to the gentleman. Plus, Area 51. He knows a lot about Area 51. James Goodall does. But I want to let him tell you about himself and his background. Because he's got a really interesting background. But that's just my 2 cents about the whole aircraft thing. Because whether it's military or domestic aircraft, I'm there. I was raised that way. And I'm just playing crazy. All right. So let me get James Goodall on. And then he can tell you about himself.
Hey there, how's it going? Glad to be here.
I'm excited. And what is that behind you? I was noticing that when you were in the green room. I was looking around you trying to see. Oh yeah, there it is.
That is my A-12 that I worked on for 15 years. Yeah, it was the whole time I worked on it was in Minnesota. But my love for airplanes started probably I was about 5 years old. And my dad came into the bedroom. We're living in San Jose. I'm a third generation San Franciscan, so I'm real familiar with your neck of the woods. And my dad, I'd already gone to bed, but it was still light out. And he came into the bedroom and said, I don't know what's coming, but you got to get up and see it, whatever it is. So we went out in the front. We were in a duplex, not that far from San Jose Municipal Airport. Now, this is 1953, 54, maybe even earlier, a long time ago. And you could hear this roar, and the ground was vibrating. And over the coast mountains came not one, not two, but 24 Convair B-36s, the largest.
Wow.
The largest bomber in the Strategic Air Command's quiver of weapons. And I mean, I couldn't believe my eyes. And from that day on, I have been fascinated with machines, primarily airplanes, primarily Air Force, but I also spent all my free time from the time I was about 7 until I was about 12 at Moffett Field Naval Air Station.
Oh my gosh, the blimps. Oh my gosh.
And my best friend's dad was base commander there. And we were referred to as Captain Smith's son and that friend of his. Because we pretty much ran, we didn't go on the runway, we didn't go on the taxiways, but we rode our bikes everywhere. We went in all the hangars, primarily the big hangar 1. And I can remember one day I went there almost every weekend. And during the summer, I was there during the week. We'd go to the pool. They had a beautiful pool there on base. And Danny said, hey, there's something so cool in the big hangar. We got to go see it. So we jumped on our bicycles. And again, like I'm 7 at the time, maybe a little bit older than that. But so we ride into the big hangar. We come in on the, I think it's an east-west placement. So we came out on the west side, the one closest to Bayshore.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very, very far end, now this hangar is 1,100 feet long, 400 feet wide, and 400 feet tall. It actually can rain inside the hangar on a humid day. The moisture will build up in the ceiling, and you'll get drops. It's just crazy. But at the far end was an area that it wasn't roped off, but it was big black curtains in the area and a sign that says keep out. Not like the ones we have today, use of deadly force authorized. It was just keep out. But there was nobody there. And we were invisible. We were there so often that no one even noticed us.
Mm-hmm.
So Danny said, come on, let's go. So we went behind the curtain, and there staring me, and it was still classified secret at the time, was the Lockheed Skunk Works XF-104 Starfighter.
Wow.
I mean, it was polished. It was beautiful. It was right out of, Buck Rogers. We walked around it, and you didn't want to touch the leading edge of the wing because Danny says, that thing's really sharp. It'll cut you. I don't think it was ever that sharp, but they did have wing protectors on it if it was on the flight line. So, so Danny said, hey, get in the cockpit. Okay. You didn't take very much coaxing to get me to get in the cockpit. So we opened the canopy, move the boarding ladder over. I get in, close the canopy. Danny lashes it, and I'm in there for about 2 minutes. Look, I'm not touching anything because I don't know. I mean, I didn't know at the time that you don't put an airplane in a wind tunnel with a live ejection seat. And back then, the original XF and even the YF-104 had a downward ejection seat. Matter of fact, when Bill Park was flying at, I think near Mud Lake near Tonopah, Nevada. Now, this is real early in flight test.
Mm-hmm.
And he was on the deck doing 1,100 miles an hour. Wow. And the tail started, the horizontal tail assembly started to delaminate and come off. And he realized he was going to lose control of the airplane. But he was only 200 feet off the desert floor. So he actually rotated the airplane upside down, and ejected.
Oh, so you can eject
out the bottom, and he got out. And Bill Park was one of the Skunk Works top test pilots, and he almost became a Skunk Works ace because he crashed the XF-104. He bailed out of the number one Half Blue, which was a technology demonstrator for the F-117. He was coming in on landing in an A-12, and this was the last operational airplane to be built. And his hydraulic system froze up as he's coming. Come over here. He's coming in for his final. The airplane just kept rotating, and the airplane was literally straight up, wing up, straight up and down, when he realized there was no way he was going to get the airplane straightened up. So he ejected, and he made one swing, and he was on the ground, and the A-12 crashed not that far from him there. This is at Area 51. I think had 10 hours on the airframe when he lost the bird. And then the last airplane was the M21 mother airplane, the MD-21. They built two mother airplanes to launch the drone. The drone was designed to fly over the former Soviet Union and China, fly over denied airspace. Where the Blackbird flew at 2,100 miles an hour, the D-21 flew about 2,300 miles an hour.
Wow.
And the A-12, the CIA version of the Blackbird, it would go to 90,000 feet any day. Maybe straight and level. I think the straight and level, the highest one ever flew was 92,500 feet. Bill Park, when he lost the A-12 that he was in that had 10 hours on it, he wanted to see how high it can go. So he zoomed to about 96,200 feet. And that's when he overtemped the hydraulic system. And he actually, the engines wouldn't throttle back. So he actually dropped his gear at Mach 2.3 or 2.4. Of course, it rips the gear doors off, but the tech order said you can lower the gear as long as it's not transonic. So when he punched out, the airplane was already pre-damaged from lowering the landing gear at Mach 2.4. So he crashed 4 Skunk Works airplanes. If he'd have crashed a 5th one, he would have been a Skunk Works ace. Wow. Not a title I think he really wanted. Yeah.
Did the A-12 have that fuel leaking problem that the SR71 did?
Yeah, the SR71, it was worse because they had wet wings. The A-12 had dry wings. But the environment that the Blackbird operates in, you go from minus 70 at 85,000 feet. That's minus 70 Fahrenheit. And as you go through the air, you heat up the airframe, and the airframe can get up to 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. So they the first time they filled it with fuel, they were putting in a couple thousand pounds of fuel, gallons or whatever, however you wanted to define it. And as fast as they were filling it was draining out of all the seams and stuff on the airplane. So they weren't quite sure what to do. So they went to East LA. They hired a group of locals who, one, didn't speak English because they didn't have to, and their job was to go into the fuel tanks, and they figured that a neoprene bladder would crack after just a few flights because of the extreme heat, extreme cold. So they used a water-soluble glacial clay. Now, if you live in the Pacific Northwest like I did for 10 years, or actually 18 years total, I lived in Whidbey Island, and Whidbey is the remnants of the last 2 ice ages. And if you're in your garden, you dig down, you come up, you'll invariably come up with this gray, slimy, it's wet, but it's impenetrable by water. And it's just slimy, and it's this glacial clay. And I believe that's what they used to seal the seams. So, because everything else is going to be damaged by the JP7. It actually eats neoprene soles off of your boots. So if you were a ground crew member at Beale or even at Kadena, You got 2 new pair of boots every 90 days because they knew within 90 days the soles would be rotting off of your boots. So, but it's the Blackbird is it's such an incredible airplane, and it does leak fuel. A lot of fighters have maybe 10,000 pounds of fuel or less. A Blackbird will almost leak that much during combat operations before it takes off. During training missions, they put 40,000 pounds of fuel in the airplane. This is good for either the A-12 or the SR71, or, as a matter of fact, the YF-12 Interceptor. And it's like someone is on top of the airplane with a garden hose, with the hose turned on fairly high on both wings, and that's the fuel pouring down from the airplane. And they have a fuel recovery system, both at Beale and at Kadena. But during combat operations, they put in 60,000 pounds of fuel. The airplane will hold 100,000 pounds of fuel. They don't fill them up completely because they've lost 3 airplanes to wheel and tire failure on takeoff because they were not overweight, but they were on the critical point of what the tires could support. The main bogies have 3 22-ply tires on each main landing gear assembly. If you lose one because of being overweight or being weighed as much as they did, about 140,000 pounds, if one pops, the other 2 will go instantly. The rims are titanium. And of course, the runways are concrete. So here you have a gigantic sparkler on the bottom of the underneath the airplane. You blow a tire. Now this thing is throwing up shrapnel up to the bottom, to the wet wing if it's an SR-71. And now you have fuel pouring down. You have a real high temperature with the molten titanium on the grinding on the concrete runway, and the airplane is in full afterburner. So that really caused some problems. So they lost 3 airplanes to wheel and tire failure. Since you lived in Seattle, I don't know if you went to the Museum of Flight.
Oh yeah.
And saw the mother airplane. That's the only one. That's the M21 with the D21 on top of it. That is the my mind just went blank. That is the 14th. That's the 14th Blackbird built.
Wow.
And the one that was lost was the 15th. But the airplane is a piece of engineering marvel. It was designed using slide rules, and if you're younger than 60, you probably have never seen a slide rule. Slide rule is a slipstick that engineers used before there were computers, before there were calculators. My father had one. He was a professor at Stanford, postgraduate engineering, and he worked on other stuff. But he called it his supercomputer, and it was about a 32-inch long slide rule. Mm-hmm. And he said he was born with it. That was part of him, and he could whip that thing out and go zip, 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 and come up with an answer, several points past the decimal point. And he had a triple major when he was at Caltech: electrical engineering, physics, and mathematics. So he was that's the environment I had to grow up in. But the airplane was designed using slide rules. And the thing that's really probably as amazing about this as anything, from signing a contract to first flight, was 32 months. Wow. Now, in today's world, the Air Force can't change the paint scheme in a C-130 in 32 months. And I saw the Iron Bird for the F-35, actually the X-35, in August of 1990. And it's still not fully mission capable. It does not have the Block 4. I think it's 4F is the fully operational configuration, and they're still working on the software. So they did incredible things, and you had to take in consideration the environment this airplane was operating in. it lived in the desert, high desert, Area 51. It's about 100 miles north of Las Vegas. And it also operated out of Diego Garcia for a while, and Kadena, Okinawa, and Mildenhall, Royal Air Force Base in the UK. But the airplane, when you heat something up from ambient temperature, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and you move it up to 800 to 1,000 degrees, things grow. And I've heard people say, "Oh, the airplane grows a foot, it grows this." I sat down with the chief metallurgist for the Skunk Works. His name was Torrey Larson. I sat down with him one day and I said, "All right, Torrey," he said, "I got a question. Everything on the Blackbird's been declassified, so there isn't anything you can't hem and haw about." I said, "How much does the Blackbird grow?" So he pulled out he called his metals Bible. It gives the coefficient of expansion for all known types of metals. Mm-hmm. So he pulled it out, and I forget what the exact number is, but it's like B210 something titanium. So he puts in his calculation based on standard day, and after 22 minutes at Mach 3.2, the airplane's fully soaked. And the average overall temperature is like 550 degrees. Now, your broiler in your oven's about 475. So it's another 75 degrees hotter than your broiler. And that's the overall average temperature. The leading edge of the rudders, the inlet lip from the engines, that can get up to about 1,100 degrees. The exhaust ejector, oh shit, I got it. Excuse me, I got to turn this off.
That's cool. That's cool. That happens.
Yeah, so Torrey pulls out his metals Bible, and he's going through all these calculations, and he stopped and he said, "Okay, so first of all, the airplane grows in all dimensions when it's heated up, but its length is the SR71 is 107 feet long. The A12 was 105 feet. It didn't have a replaceable nose, and it didn't have an extended tail cone. But the average length that the SR71 grows after 22 minutes at Mach 3.2 is 1.92 inches. That's all. But also grows in
okay.
Pardon? I think you just froze on me for a second. And but the part of the airplane that is really fascinating, that grows a lot, is the Pratt & Whitney J58. Pardon?
Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. What happens is if there's a lot of everybody in my neighborhood's on Xfinity, so if it's a hot news day like that shooting in New York, everybody and their brother are on right now. So,
or you freeze up.
Yeah. Freeze up.
Yeah. So the most fascinating part of the Blackbird that grows is the Pratt & Whitney J58. Now, that is an engine that was developed for the Navy back in 1954-55 timeframe, mm-hmm. when Kelly Johnson was looking at propulsion for what turned out to be the A12, the ox cart. He liked all the numbers that the Pratt & Whitney J75 had to offer, and he said, we need something more robust, more power at high altitude. And they had an engine. It's called the J58 P2 mm-hmm. and P4, and both those were strictly for the Navy, and it was for a generic fleet defense interceptor. One of the considerations was they were going to use the RA-5 Vigilante. They were going to take out, and that's a real pretty carrier-based aircraft and a big one for a carrier. It's over 80,000 pounds. It's a big airplane, but they were going to put a J58 in that and just have one engine versus the two J79s. Mm-hmm. So they developed the Pratt & Whitney J58 around the Navy core of the P2 and the P4 engine, and it's the power for Mach 3 plus. I mean, it's an incredible airplane, and they didn't go Mach Mach 3 until March or April, consistently, almost a year later. Yeah, they were working their way up. One of the problems that Jim Eastham, he was one of the test pilots. He was, they had taken out the YJ engines, which were the original prototype engines, and they stole, if you want to call it that, they borrowed without permission a group of Model K engines, which were the SR71 engines. Now the SR71 wasn't flying yet, but they wanted something with a little bit more horsepower. Mm-hmm. Now the J58, YJ58 was rated at 34,000 pounds of thrust at sea level. At altitude, that 34,000 pounds of thrust is only represents 17% of the total thrust, because the inlet and the exhaust ejector turn into a ramjet. So you're moving a 130,000 pound airplane through the air at 3,200 to 3,400 feet per second, which is 2 miles every 3 seconds, 43 miles a minute. And on its retirement flight, it was 972, which was the best running of all the SRs. Everyone had their own personality. That the airplane would when they took off, they left LA. They weren't sure if they got a full fuel load, because it's not uncommon for the fuel sensors to malfunction. Mm-hmm. So they hooked up with the tanker, they put in X number of pounds of fuel, and they started their run. And right around St. Louis, the gauges came up and they realized that, hey, we have enough fuel to make it all the way. Because that was what was really critical. So they firewalled it, and you went from St. Louis to Cincinnati. I don't know if anybody's ever, any of your audience have driven that route on Interstate 70, but they did it in 8 minutes. And Ben Rich, who I was blessed to have as a friend, Ben and I talked once a quarter for 25 years. He'd just call me up, or I'd call him up. But he told me that if they'd have known that they had a full fuel load, they could have, on its retirement flight, flown from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. in about 47 minutes. Now, when they were going to Kadena, Okinawa, now it's a long way away. I mean, that's almost to Japan. 5 hours, 25 minutes. That's all it took. And the airplane is more fuel efficient at Mach 3 than it is subsonic. Ken Collins, who is one of the few, I think he's the only one left that has flown both the A-12 and the SR-71. And I think he just turned 92. Sweetheart of a guy. And most of them are. There's one or two that I have no use for, but that's my personal opinion. But Ken Collins is just a patriot, a hell of a pilot, and has the distinction of being the only surviving pilot to fly both the A-12 and the SR-71 operationally. But he was flying an SR. He had left Beale. He had hooked up with the tanker. He's going at Mach 3.2, and he loses his stabilization augmentation system, which you cannot fly that airplane by hand at Mach 3. The stabilization augmentation system does it for you. So he had to go subsonic, and he used twice as much fuel heading back to Beale than he did going to the point where he had to turn around, and he had a tailwind. So the airplane, the SR-71 loves to fly fast, right? And unlike every other military aircraft, where the posted speed or the suggested speed is 68 to 72% of what their top speed. With the Blackbird, when you're flying a Mach 3.24, you're about 97 to 98% to the end of the operational envelope. Anything faster than 3.43, and you'll blow out the inlets. You'll have a dual unstart. As a matter of fact, Bill Weaver, who had an SR-71 disintegrate around him when it had an unstart at speed and altitude. They were flying 974, which was the best flying of all the airplanes. And that's the one that you'll see on models with the snake and the one. They called it Ichiban, number one. And that is the Ichiban is what the regulars in Okinawa called the Blackbird, and they nicknamed it Habu because it's big, it's nasty, it goes places that no one else knows where it's going. And on the island of Okinawa, there's a black snake. It's in the cobra family that they call Habu. So they just started calling the A-12 originally, then the SR-71 got the nickname Habu, and it's stuck. It's been that way forever. But that's the airplane. Everything about it is special. I've helped dismantle three Blackbirds, an A-12, an SR-71A, and an SR-71C. The one that went to where did the C go? I went to Hill, the Hill Air Force Base Museum, and it is a beautifully built machine. I was an artist when I was younger, and I did some sculpture work, and so I'm taking things apart and I'm looking at some of this machine titanium, and it's absolutely beautiful, just gorgeous. But the airplane, it could not be built today because you have too many nosy congressmen and senators. You have too many, too many people within the bureaucratic nightmare that's called the Pentagon, who are always looking for their favorite projects, and the secrecy. It would be hard to keep the secrecy today. You have a generation of kids that don't believe in rules. That doesn't pertain to me. Mm-hmm. So they would have a hard time building that airplane today. And the thing that's ironic about it, they built 50 manned Blackbirds from the first A-12, which was number 121, to the last SR-71A. Actually, it was the C model was the last one built, but that was parts of two airplanes. They built 50 Blackbirds, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it today. It's just the airplane. It took a special breed of people to get it there. Now, if the world was filled with Elon Musk's type, then yes, they could build another one. And it's a shame. And the only reason the program was canceled when it was canceled is then Chief of Staff Larry Welsh. He was turned down to fly the airplane when he was a major. They said, "You're not a good enough pilot. We don't want you." Well, he being a politician, as well as ended up being a general officer, he ended up being the assistant chief of staff for Jerry O'Malley, who was chairman of who was Air Force chief of staff, and Welsh was his exec. Well, Jerry O'Malley was the first blue suiter to fly the SR-71 in combat. It was March 1968. And he ended up getting killed in a plane crash, and Welsh took his place and became Air Force Chief of Staff. And the first thing he did was send a letter, which I had a chance to read, but they wouldn't let me copy it. It was to all staff, senior NCOs in the Strategic Air Command, SAC. Anybody caught saying anything positive about the Blackbird program, well, it will have a negative effect on your future United States Air Force. If you want to slam the airplane, be my guest. But he was an ass. He took his petty his feelings for her because he wasn't a good pilot, and he turned it into a vendetta against the Blackbird, and the program was canceled. Now, during the leading up to Desert Shield, they Secretary of Defense, I'm trying to remember who, if that was Weinberger. Regardless, the Air Force Secretary of Defense contacted the Skunk Works. Now, the last Blackbird flew March, April of 90. Desert Storm started, August 4th, 1990. And so the airplanes, it still had a full inventory of airplanes. They still had a full inventory of parts and engines. And the simulator was at NASA. So because they were flying, they had two airplanes. They had 967 and 971. And they had, they knew they could get enough crew. If the word went out, they could get as many people as they wanted to. I mean, because a lot of them were still living around the Yuba City, Marysville area. So as far as maintenance guys, a lot of those guys went from the SR to the U2. So they were still at Beale. And so they contacted Ben Rich and said, I need an answer from Lockheed. How long would it take to get one airplane fully mission capable with at least 3 flight crew, maintenance people? It'll operate out of Beale. We have all the parts still, that are still there. How long will it take? Ben came back and said, I will need a blank check. I'm not going to have to justify everything that I need. I want to be able to go to wherever the sensors are and say, I need that, and without any red tape or any problems, acquire that, those sensors. And it came back and he said, if I get the green light today, you'll have an operational airplane ready in 30 days. Huh. And so I said, okay, hold that thought. So it came back, about, a week later, said, what would it take for 2 airplanes? And he said, I already figured that out because I knew you were going to ask for more than one. Said it will be 30 days as well. And I need a blank check. And I don't have to sit down and argue with people to justify whatever I'm getting for the airplane. You'll get your money's worth, and they always have. So he said, well, hold that thought. And about 10 days later, it wasn't Secretary of Defense, but someone got back to Ben and said, because the program was ultimately canceled at the request of the Air Force Chief of Staff, which was Larry Welsh, to reinstate the program today would make him look bad. This ass is the reason why the program was canceled, and because you didn't want that jackass to, I don't know if I can say that. You didn't want that jerk to be upset because you're reinstating it. That is the reason why that wasn't used during Desert Storm. They needed it during Desert Storm. U-2s were vulnerable. They were, we didn't have the high altitude drones that we have today. So they weren't going to fly U-2 operations, over contested areas. They could get up high enough, you can look farther in, and you're out of SAM, surface air missile threat. But it's just everything about that airplane. There isn't anything in that airplane that you can go to your local Ace Hardware store and buy something for it, or to your local FBO at the local airport, or even go to any Air Force base. There's almost nothing that you can find on the shelves that would be fully compatible with the Blackbird. I mean, one of the funny things, Jim Eastham, and I had the honor to interview almost everyone who's crashed an airplane. I've interviewed almost all the original CIA test pilots, all the Lockheed test pilots back in the day, and a lot of operational pilots, both with the A-12 and the SR71. It's just an absolutely incredible airplane. But there's a lot of funnies associated with it. But Jim Eastham they were having problems with the inlet scheduling. And he get up to about 2.6, 2.7 Mach, push the throttles all the way forward, and it just sits there. Matter of fact, it would even slow down a little bit. And they'd back off and try some different settings and try it again. And finally, they went in and they'd say, okay, we're you can't see it very well, but at the direct, if you go on, you can see a seam where it sort of dips in right behind my ear right now. Those are free-floating tertiary doors. So they pinned them closed to see if that would help. And they put some duct tape over some of the bleed bypass. Well, hey, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, hey, too bad.
The world's fastest airplane's got duct tape.
Oh yeah. That's was Mach 3 duct tape. So so Jim's up flying and he's up to about 2.6, 2.7. And he said he's cruising there and nothing's happening. All of a sudden the airplane just sort of vibrates and boom, he's up to 2.9, boom, boom, 2.92, 2.95, boom, he hit Mach 3. So there's a duration clock in the upper quadrant of the instrument panel. It's like a stopwatch. And he hits that because it said go Mach 3 for 10 minutes and then go into your descent profile. So he goes up to Mach 3.0 and all of a sudden it was almost like a machine gun going off and the airplane all of a sudden started accelerating. He got up to Mach 3.33 and he's excited. And at 10 minutes, he started his descent profile. Now, one of the critical things about flying the airplane, once the airplane's heated up, everything's expanded, including the engine. The most critical part of bringing that airplane back down is the descent profile. You have to cool the outer casing of the engine at the same rate you're cooling the inner working. So it's a real specific profile. And they lost an airplane, lost an A-12. Jack Weeks was over the far Western Pacific coming down from 75,000 feet. And they had a catastrophic engine explosion because he was descending too fast. And he had two mismatched engines from what I've read. One had fixed inlet guide vanes and one had adjustable. And he didn't. And how you tune the inlet varies between those two type engines. And he didn't see the write-up on the 731 forms, which is more or less is the diary for the airplane. And it stays with the airplane. So the airplane disintegrated on him over the far Western Pacific, and they never found any remnants of it. They searched for it for 6 weeks, and there was not even an oil slick. But it's when you're moving through the air faster than a speeding bullet, and you're more powerful than a locomotive. I mean, and all of a sudden, when you have oh shit, what was that? Boom! I mean, it happens instantly. Mm-hmm. And the airplane came down. Now they built 50-man Blackbirds. They crashed 20. There was only 4 fatalities. But one of the more interesting events, and it would sort of go into things that go bump in the night type thing. It was either late 1972 or early 1973. Lieutenant Colonel, I think it was a major at the time, Major Dave Fruhoff was flying a night training mission out of Okinawa. He was in the far Western Pacific. He was at 72,000 feet, a Mach 2.7, or maybe 78,000 feet, a Mach 2.7. 3/4 moon off to his left. And he's going straight. He's going through his checklist. They're making sure everything is working right. And all of a sudden he gets a glint of something about 5 or 6 miles off to his right and maybe 5,000 or 6,000 feet above him. It's metallic, it's reflective, and he's getting a glint of something from the moon, from the 3/4 moon. Anybody who's been out in the desert, even a 3/4 moon, you can read a book. It's it gets that bright, and at almost 80,000 feet, you don't have any atmosphere to degrade the to absorb the light, so you get the full effect.
Mm-hmm.
He contacts Cadena on secure voice, wants to know if another bird's up. He said, "No, you're up there by yourself." He said, "No, I'm not." So he moved the throttles forward because he is at that particular time at 2.7 at 78,000 feet. He's at absolute minimum burner. He could almost go out of burner and still be supersonic, not necessarily Mach 3, but he'd still be supersonic. So he advances the throttles. He does about a 10-degree bank as he's heading up towards his object. He can't make out the shape because there's glare inside the cockpit. He has a reflective visor on his David Clark suit. He doesn't want to open the visor in case something happened and he had to bail out. He would be dead instantly. That is his capsule. So he had he's inching closer to it. He's climbing and he's heading towards it. His backseater gets on the intercom and says, "Hey, Dave, we have company." He said, "Yeah, no, I'm gonna go take a closer look." And he said when he was still a couple thousand feet below it and still a mile or so away from it, and again, he couldn't make out the shape. It wasn't, but it had edges and it was metallic. This thing took off at about a 30-degree angle of attack and left him in the dust. He figured he lost sight of it between 180 and 200,000 feet. He estimates that the speed that it left him, now he's going Mach 3, this guy's going Mach 12.
Wow.
This is late 72, early 73. So back in the day, you didn't go to your commander on a post mission debrief and say, "Hey, I chased a UFO," because that was a for sure, without question, that would kill your career right then and there. Not so much today, but back then, yes. I mean, I asked my boss, Major General Wayne Gatlin. He was when he was a major. He was on alert at Duluth Air Force Base. He had F-94Cs, again, a Skunk Works airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And the Finley Air Force Station, hit the scramble alert for they had 3 F-94Cs on alert, and they launched because they had tracked a fast-moving unknown over Lake Superior. Now, normally you don't fly across Lake Superior. If you're a military aircraft or a private aircraft, you go around Lake Superior because Lake Superior makes its own weather. Uh-huh. It can be bright and clear. You get in the middle of that lake, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of not a blizzard or a rain squall. And if you had to leave the airplane and you hit that water, even in August, they don't have tides because it's a lake. But I can remember the first time I went up to Lake Superior, it was 94 degrees, it was hot. I didn't have air conditioning. I stopped along the road right next to the lake. I rolled up my pant legs, took my shoes and socks off, stepped in the lake, and I thought I was going to die. I think the water was like 41 degrees. This is end of summer. This has been baked with a lot of sunshine, and it was still in the 40s. So you didn't want to bail out there. But as he's coming up on it, Finley says, "It's heading right towards us." And General Gatlin said, "Well, we can see something ahead of us." And he went into full afterburner, which you can only do for about a minute. Unlike the SR71 that flies an afterburner, and it's the only it's the only airplane ever to fly with full-time afterburners. But he's heading towards this object, and his Wizzo, his weapons control, his weapons officer, said every time he would lock on, the radar would die. So they pull a circuit breaker, reset everything, turn it back on. It's scanning, it locks on. As soon as it locks on, it dies. And now they're getting closer to shore, and it's heading right towards Finley. And Finley said, "It's moving fast, and it's coming right towards us." "Well, it didn't go by us. It hasn't moved. Where in the heck is it at?" And General Gatlin got on the horn and said, "Well, if you go outside, it's right above your geodesic dome," because the radar had in a big golf ball type thing.
Mm-hmm.
They went out, and as soon as they went out the door, this thing went straight up. And Minnesota weather during the summer, the air is crystal clear. There's no pollution up there, and you could, if you were down in a well and you looked up, you could see stars. That's how clear it is. And he said this thing went straight up and disappeared. So I asked, and I was on state staff at the time, and I asked General Gatlin. I said, okay, let's assume this is 1984, 85 time frame. I said, General Gatlin, what if I would, let's assume I'm a F-16 pilot, and I retired as a master sergeant. I wasn't a pilot at all, so in the service. But they said, let's assume I'm a F-16 pilot, and I encounter a UFO, a flying saucer, a UAP, whatever you want to call it. What do I do? So when you come back, this is General Gatlin talking. You come back, you do your post-flight, check everything in. You go to the O Club, you get yourself 2 or 3 stiff drinks, you down them, you go back to your billet, and you forget everything you saw that day. Because if you even hint of the fact that, oh, I chased a UFO, there's a big crazy emblem, or the sticker you find on poisons that
waiting for you. Boy,
that's going to go in your 201 file. So anybody, oh gosh, this guy is he's toxic. He's someone you don't want to be around. So everything about the Blackbird, there's so much fun associated with it. Mel Vavadich was an A-12 pilot. And I don't think Mel flew SR71s as well, but he passed away a couple of years ago. He was, I think it was a 928. They had just rewired all of the airplanes, and they made a mistake when they rewired his. And he was very, very safety conscious. He was probably the safest pilot, flying the Blackbirds, because he was religious about safety. So he's at the end of the runway, engine's running, he's checking everything out, he's going through all his procedures, but he's also going through and making sure that if he has to leave the airplane, is everything where it should be? And it was. So he takes off, and as soon as he lifts off the ground, things go wrong. The airplane on the ground, if you move the stick one way, the rudders turn one way, or the elevons move up and down a certain way. I mean, everything worked normally. But when the oleos are fully extended, the SAS flies the airplane. It is sort of a rudimentary fly-by-wire. So Mel lifted off, and when you had pitch, you had yaw. And when you had yaw, you had oops. I just crashed.
That's what happens when you don't get your pitch and yaw lined up right.
Yeah, I'm mostly Sicilian, so I talk with my hands.
You're okay. Yeah.
So he realizes he has to leave this airplane. He's about 150 feet off the runway. He's this way.
Uh-huh.
Now, it was December. I can't remember the exact date in December. It was right near Christmas. And when he ejected, there was about 4 inches of ice on Groom Dry Lake. That had a very, very wet winter and had all this ice. And when he ejected, he went out of the airplane this way, sideways, and at about a half a degree angle. And he came in, and he was still in his seat, never left his seat, and he's skidding along the dry lake bed on 4 inches of ice. So it was like a skating rink. I mean, he's moving fast. Well, the airplane's coming up and over, and it almost crashes on top of him. And he can feel the heat from the fire. He unbuckles himself out of the seat. He can't feel his legs. He can't move his legs. He figured he broke his back. So he's on his elbows and he's trying to get away from the fire. Bill Park, who's in the soft truck, the supervisor of safety, he's come zipping across the dry lake bed on ice that's melting because of a fire, and he's heading right towards Mel. He goes, he hits the brakes, and he actually accelerates because he's on melting ice, and he almost ran over Mel Vovidich. So now the ambulance comes out there, the fire trucks are there trying to put the fire out. The paramedics, pick up Mel. They drop him 3 times. He said he got hurt more by the paramedics trying to get him into the ambulance. So finally he said, hey, screw this. He got in, he started wiggling his toes. He realized that he had only shocked his back. And he's on his hands and knees, and he's working his way over towards the ambulance. He gets in, heads back. They did a full check of his health, and he was okay. And of course, Kelly Johnson heard that they crashed an A-12. He was on he got on his probably his Jetstar, and had Ray Gowdy fly him to the test site. They called it Kelly's Ranch. Later on, they called it Elvis's house. Elvis has left the building, Kelly said, I know exactly what the problem is. I want you to cut this area out of the airplane and have it ready for me when I land. And the airplane's still out on the lake bed, smoldering. So sure as shooting, the outputs for the pitch and the yaw had the same size connector, same type of connector, and they were reversed. So when you had pitch, you had yaw. When you had yaw, you had pitch. And there was no way that Mel could have overcome that because of his natural tendencies. When you've been flying so long and it's second nature to you, you don't even think when you do something. Your body knows what to do. So you're trying to counter, 20 years of being one of the best fighter pilots or pilots in the military that they have. So Kelly knew what the problem was. Mel turned out he was okay. So knowing what the problem was, Bill Park, who was then the chief test pilot for the Skunk Works, Mel Vovidich, one of the original Oxcart CIA operational pilots. There was Jack Weeks, Walt Ray, Frank Murray, Ken Collins, Jack Layton, Bill Sklar, and I've interviewed them all. I did not Jack Weeks because he got killed, and same with Walt Ray, he got killed before I had a chance to interview him. But he just knowing what he knew, Mel and Bill went off to Beale where the simulator was, and they put in the exact same thing that caused his A-12 to crash. And so Vovidich goes first, knowing that you're going to have pitch when you have yaw, and you're going to have yaw when you have pitch. He tried to compensate, knowing what was going to happen. He tried 5 different times, crashed all 5 times, and boy, he was pissed. And these guys are a lot of jokers too, by the way. So he tells Bill Park and said, "Hey, I'm going to ops. I'm going to go have a cup of coffee. This stuff just sucks." Said, "I know what the problem was, yet I still crashed." And Bill said, "Well, let me try it." So Bill gets on in the sim. Mel leaves. He comes back about 45 minutes later, and Mel said, "Well, Bill, how'd you do?" And he said, "Hey, I took off and landed 3 times without a problem." And Bill, it's this interview I had with Bill Park. He said Mel's face just melted into shame because he couldn't save the airplane. And all of a sudden, I think Park realized that Mel was really bummed out over this, and Park just let out a belly laugh, said, "No, I crashed every time too." So, I mean, there's so many funny things. Oh, to get back to Jim Eastham, when he went Mach 3.33 for the very first time, he's coming in to land at Area 51, Kelly's Ranch, Dreamland. uh, Watertown Strip, all sorts of names. And he's coming in on final, and everything's checking out good, but his cockpit's starting to fill up with smoke. He figured he'd gone Mach 3, he'd gotten really hot in the airplane, and he probably cooked some stuff, so he wasn't concerned about it. So he touches down, he goes and pulls the chute. Now, you need the drag chute to stop the airplane because the brakes are inadequate to stop a Blackbird. And he pops the chute, nothing happens. Oh, crap.
Oh, boy.
And but to take in consideration that may happen on some instances, they put a black stripe, a mile diameter circle on the dry lake bed. So you just follow that black line, you'll eventually run out of energy. So you'll eventually stop. So as soon as he landed and he pops the chute, nothing happens. His cockpit is filled with smoke. So he pops the canopy. The canopy goes flying off, clears out. He goes and hits the brakes. He had full pressure, hits the brakes, and all of a sudden, no hydraulic pressure. So he has no brakes. So, oh, crap, we're in for a long ride. So I don't think he made a full circle around Groom Lake, but he was way on the other end. And he finally stops. He takes his helmet off, unstraps himself, looks behind him, and there's smoke coming out of every crack and crevice on the airplane. It turns out that the wire coating that they had used was good for about 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And when he went Mach 3.33, it literally charred or burnt off all of the insulation in the fuselage, which is the whole airplane.
Yeah.
And if he'd been in the air they figure maybe 3 to 5 minutes, he would have had to punch out because he would have lost control of the airplane. So they why did he lose hydraulic pressure? Why did the brakes fail on him? Someone had decided they were going to save a few dollars instead of using stainless steel pike plugs for when they're bleeding the brake lines. We'll use aluminum plugs. Well, it gets up 600 or 700 degrees in that wheel well. Aluminum melts at 710 or depending on the alloy. So it's just like warm chocolate, and they just extruded them out. They just pushed them out. Why didn't the 50 or 40-foot ribbon chute? Why didn't it deploy?
Mm-hmm.
And when they opened the thing up, the doors have a small gap, and they didn't have an inner piece that you would come down there, so you didn't have a gap. It had gotten so high, it melted the Nomex pilot chute. It was like someone got a welder and just melted right the bead. So when he popped the door, this thing was literally welded in place, melted Nomex, but it wouldn't work. So they made a modification, put an inner lip on the doors, and that solved that problem. So there was a lot of teething when it came to those kind of things. Okay. Now they had, of the 20 losses, the 20 crashes, they only had 4 fatalities. If it wasn't for a broken arm, they would only had 3. Mm-hmm. On the 4th launch of a D-21 off a mother airplane, like the one that's the Museum of Flight in Seattle, that's 940. 941 was the one that did all the testing, launching the D-21. When they went up, they had 3 successful launches of the D-21 off the mother airplane. Now, when the D-21 left the airplane, it only had about 2 feet on either side of the tails to clear as it went up through the bow wake. And there's film of the first 3 launches, and you can see as the drone is leaving the mother airplane, you'll see a puff of smoke come out of the back of the D-21. That's as it goes through the bow wake, and it causes a brief unstart. And they think what happened on and he's in a 0.9 G arc on the first 3 launches. So Kelly was a yes or no guy. He didn't like a lot of words on it. When he had a question, he could say yes or no. He didn't want you to go into any dissertation on what would cause it. Mm-hmm. So they had 3 successful launches. The drones weren't necessarily successful, but the launch and the separation worked as planned. So Kelly brings in Bill Park, and he said, "Bill," he said, "I got a question. In your opinion, can a line pilot maintain a 0.9 G arc in a combat environment?" And Park starts going through this long, hemming and hawing, this and that. And Kelly said, "Stop. I want a yes or a no." So Park's going there. He's doing this, figuring this, doing that. Finally, after about 2 minutes, this is from Park to me. When I interviewed him, he looked at Kelly and said, "No." that was his answer to this complex question. He said, "Okay, on the 4th launch, I want you to be at 1 G. I want you to go straight and level. And I want to see what's going to, we'll launch straight and level on the fourth attempted launch." And this was on July 30th, 1966. They were about 200 miles off the coast of California, off of Point Magoo. They're at 79,000 feet, about 3.1. And it was the first time that the other M21 mother airplane was flying. And he flew, it was about a mile away, but it was off the starboard side. And Keith Beswick was in the back seat with a 16 millimeter camera, shooting it. And the drone goes up, it goes through the bow wake, and then it comes by and it crashes back into the airplane. And where the wings comes down and where they go like this, that's the splice, the 715 splice, as they call it. And that's where it hit. And Park didn't realize he was involved in a midair collision. He thought because there was a shift in the aft center of gravity, the airplane was pitching up. So he gave us some forward stick. But then he said things started going by him this way, and that was not a good sign. And he told me, he said, I always stayed with the airplane until it was safer to be outside the airplane. So they rode the forward fuselage down. Now it's tumbling and it's twirling. He said he was going through 5 or 6 revolutions, I think a minute, but 5 to 6 G's positive to 5 to 6 G's negative as the thing is tumbling and twirling. So finally, at about 68,000 feet, because the altimeter is still working, he said at 68,000 feet, he felt it was now time to leave the airplane. And on the morning brief, they were told that there was the ceiling was at 5,000 in broken clouds. And so you had 5,000 feet till you hit the water. That was at 6 a.m. This is now 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So he initiates eject. The backseater goes out first. He goes out next. He sees Ray Torx flash from his ejection seat, so he knew he got out of the airplane okay. And he's coming down, and the first thing that happens when you leave the airplane, now Bill Weaver ran into the same thing when his airplane disintegrated. The heater for the faceplate is external to the suit. It's part of the airplane. So as soon as you leave the airplane, it's 70 below zero up there. You're breathing, all of a sudden, the inside of your faceplate frosts up. And you can see light and dark, but you can't see anything else. So he's in his seat, and there's an automatic sequence at 15,000 feet. The seat will automatically cut your belts and push you out, and your main chute will deploy. And I asked all the Blackbird pilots when they told me at 15,000 feet, the seat will push you out. I said, why 15,000 feet? He said, because between Area 51 and the Pacific Ocean, where they're going to be flying out of, is the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And the tallest mountain is Mount Whitney, which is 14,500 and some odd feet.
Makes sense.
So they had it set at 15,000 feet. So as lucky as some people are, there was the chance of you having to eject as you're right over the top of Mount Whitney. They wanted to make sure you had at least 500 feet of air for that parachute to open up. And so he's going down, and he can't see anything. His hands are now freezing because it's 70 below zero, and he's trying to push his faceplate up and use his nose or whatever it is to see if he can get a little glimpse to where he's at. And he said it seemed like it took for an hour. Now, what happens when you leave a Blackbird at speed and altitude? You eject out with rockets. There's only 0.4% of the atmosphere up there. And he gets up there, and the first thing that happens is an 18-inch stabilization chute opens up, and it puts your butt into the airstream. So your butt's in the air, into the airstream, and as soon as you start going down, as soon as you're going vertical, that 18-inch chute is cut, and a 6-foot stabilization chute opens up. Because at 80,000 feet, 85,000 feet or higher, you could go supersonic if you didn't have something to slow you down, because there's no atmosphere to slow you down. So it's slowing them down. So they have 45 minutes of oxygen. Most of the time it's only 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. So he's sitting in his seat. He said to himself, Lockheed promised me that I would be separated from the seat at 15,000 feet. He said, I must have said that to himself 1,000 times. So almost like magic, boom, he feels the belts get cut. He's being pushed out of the seat. His main canopy opens. He opens up his visors. Oh, everything is great. I'm out of here. He knew that Ray Torek got out okay. Mm-hmm. So he's looking down. He can see the clouds below him. So I got 5,000 feet once I hit those clouds. But I want to inflate my Mae West, his life vest, early, because it's water activated. But he didn't want to wait for the water to activate. He wanted to be floating as soon as he hit the water. So he's trying to feel the T handle or the D ring to inflate his Mae West. And he can't feel it because his hands are frozen. And they had gone from a T handle to a D ring. A T handle, all you need is 2 fingers to get in there. But it was underneath his parachute harness. So he's trying to dig, finding it. Finally, he inflates it. About 20 feet below him is his one-man raft and his survival gear. And he's coming down. And he said, "Okay, when I hit the clouds, I know I have a little bit of time before I hit the water." Well, the ceiling had gone from 5,000 feet to 0. Whoa. From the time they had their briefing at 6 a.m. until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So as soon as he hit the clouds, he was in the water. And he went down, popped back up, but not very much. He said he had about 2 inches of freeboard from where the water was to his open visor because he's out of oxygen. So he has to have his visor open. And he's trying to get into his one-man raft, and he's exhausted. His hands are still, frozen. He's trying to get in. He said he tried 3 times, and he was getting totally exhausted. And he knew, all of a sudden he realized he had water halfway up his calf. The water was coming into his suit, which means it was going to pull him down. Mm-hmm. And he said you could probably hear him scream in Point Magoo, because he said he grabbed hold of it, and he said every ounce of energy he had from the end of his hair follicles to the end of his toenails, he screamed and pulled himself in, and he was, he made it. And he was waiting for Jack Ray Torek to see how he turned out. What happened to Ray? He broke his arm on the way out. A couple of the test pilots, Lockheed test pilots, had said the camera bracket in the back seat, if you have to eject, if your arm is anywhere near that, you're going to break your arm. And that's what happened to Ray. Well, Ray was a former UDT, underwater demolition team, same as a Navy SEAL. So if anybody's going to have a successful bailout in the ocean, it's going to be him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with a broken arm, he couldn't get into his life raft, and the poor guy drowns. Oh. So here he survived a midair collision at almost 80,000 feet at 2,000 miles an hour. He rode the forward fuselage down 15,000 feet before he punched out, 15 to 20,000 feet. He did that successfully, broke his arm. He hit the water, couldn't get into his life raft, and he drowned. So they knew they had a problem with the flotation device. So Melvovich, being one of the A-12 pilots, said, they're going to have the same potential problem if they have to bail out over the Pacific when they're flying over Russia or China. So they went out to Lake Mead outside of Las Vegas. They went to a very, very quiet bay there on Lake Mead. No boating around. They had two Air Force boats there, helicopter. They had divers in the water. It wasn't an overly deep bay. And all Mel did, he had this the suit, just like Bill Park and Ray Torek had, and he jumps out of the helicopter into the water. So if it wasn't for the fact that he had a couple Navy divers there to help him, he said he would have drowned. He said in a swimming pool, just calm. He said this much freeboard. So the water coming in, eventually you're gonna drown. So that was one of the tragedies where Ray Torek maybe should not have lost his life. Oh. The only one that really was unavoidable was Jack Weeks. He was in an A-12, the last flight of an A-12 out of Kadena, Okinawa. It was its last training engine check ride. They put a new engine in and he was going up, make sure it worked okay. And he was coming down through 75,000 feet, and they had a catastrophic engine explosion and the airplane disintegrated, and they never found anything about him. The other fatality was Walt Ray. He was in an A-12. The three fatalities were in the single place airplanes, and that includes the M21, and one fatality in the SRs. And the Walt Ray was kind of a short guy, and they had his head didn't sit right on the headrests, so they modified the headrests. Well, what it did, it altered the function of the ejection seat, and it jammed up on him. So he ran out of gas at 2,100 miles an hour at 90,000 feet. He ran out of gas. And to quote Bob Gilliland, a Blackbird has the same aerodynamic characteristics as an unpowered toolbox when there's no power behind it. And he said it was dropping like a rock. And he punched out. He rode the seat down at 15,000 feet, supposed to go into the release sequence, push him out. That jammed up, and it jammed up so much that he couldn't release the 5-point harness, and he rode the seat all the way to the ground. And he was alive when the seat hit the ground, and he was probably only doing about 60 miles an hour, but that was on your butt. Yeah, and it just as soon as he hit the ground, he was dead. And the other one was Bill Weaver. His airplane disintegrated around him at almost 80,000 feet, just under Mach 3. And he was in a bank. He was in a 60-degree bank, and it had an unstart, and the airplane started going like this. And it had a shift in the aft center of gravity, and the airplane just whipped around. He didn't initiate an ejection sequence, but he found himself outside the airplane at 80,000 feet. And at first he wasn't sure what happened. And what happened, the all military jets, fighters, attack aircraft, they have an emergency handle. You hit it, you pull about a 6 or 10 foot lanyard, you yank on it, it blows the canopy, and it cuts the belts. This is why fire crews go in there. They don't have to worry about unhooking everything. They pull that handle, the canopy blows off. You grab the pilot, jerk him out, get him away from the fire. My mind just, so he found himself outside the airplane. His backseater, Jim Fagg, I think was his name. I think it was Fagg that was his backseater, but that's not important. His backseater realized the airplane is starting to disintegrate. He pulls the ejection seat handles in between his legs, but as the airplane was breaking apart, the canopy was bound. It wasn't going to release, and his seat fired. And of course, your head about this far above the seat, hit the top of the canopy, broke his neck. He was dead. And then as the airplane disintegrated, it threw him out. Now, Bill Weaver, everything worked properly. But he did the same thing. He felt himself, he was going around and round and round. So he put his arms out to stabilize himself. His faceplate is frosted up. He can't see what's happening. He's falling from 80,000 feet. He's really picking up some speed. So he's trying to slow things down a little bit, putting his arms, his legs out, trying to stabilize. He doesn't know how high he is because he can't see. All he knows is that he was going around and around and around, and he kept telling himself, Kelly promised me the main chute would open up at 15,000 feet. He said, just like Bill Park, he said it about 1,000 times. And sure as shoot, at 15,000 feet, boom, the main canopy opens up. It's quite a jerk. So he opens his visor because he's now out of oxygen, and he's trying to see where, Jim Zare was the backseater. Fagg was a 978 with Denny Bush when it crashed, and he's okay. So he sees a parachute a mile or so away. So he figured, Jim Zare got out okay. And when he lands right on the edge of a mesa. It's 800 feet straight down, and his feet are right at the edge, but the wind is blowing into his face, so it's pushing him back a little bit. So he unhooks his parachute, and he hears a helicopter, like the one in MASH. It's an old Hiller bubble, open tail boom. And this guy lands not that far from him. He comes over. He said, "Hey, I heard the explosion. I saw debris. I saw 2 parachutes." He said, "Your buddy's about a mile away. Hop in. Let's go get him." So they flew over to where Jim was, and he was deceased. If it wasn't for the fact that he tried to initiate an ejection while the airplane was disintegrating, waiting until it was finished disintegrating, he would have survived. And the other fatality was we got Walt Ray, we got Jack Weeks. Jack Weeks had a engine change on an A-12 on a check flight at the very last flight, getting ready to head home. He had a catastrophic engine failure, and the airplane disintegrated. So the rest of them were guys got out. It's amazing when you think about going through the air faster than a speeding bullet. You're more powerful than a speedy locomotive, and you're able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. That is the Blackbird.
That's the Blackbird.
And I'm 77 years old, and I saw my first Blackbird on March 10th, 1964, on the ramp at Edwards Air Force Base. And it's affected me. It's affected the rest of my life.
Absolutely. Now, what about Area 51? You worked there briefly, correct? Or you worked out of Area 51, right? Or no?
No, I had officially been to Area 51 in 1964 once. I was assigned, I was permanent party at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado. Probably one of the most wonderful stateside bases that you could be assigned to if you're not in the ocean. And I had a set of orders to go TDY to Edwards Air Force Base to help support 3 programs for Category 1 testing, initial flight testing. And this was the heyday of Edwards Air Force Base. I mean, everything you could think of was flying at that time. The pre-Century series, all the Century series, B-58s, the XB-70 hadn't flown yet. And so I was there to support ground-based telemetry systems for the Lockheed YC-141 Starlifter, for the North American Aviation XB-70 Valkyrie, and for a classified program, which was the Blackbird. And on March 10th, actually, they came in on the morning from Area 51. They'd announced the existence of a Mach 3 airplane on February 24th or 26th. And then on February 29th, it was a leap year. It came in on a Saturday. And about 7 o'clock in the morning, they came straight in. There was no fancy flying. They came straight in from Area 51. They may have been flying operational test missions, but these are 2 YF-12 interceptors. Same top speed as the SR71 or the YF-12 or the A-12. They all flew at Mach 3.2. So when they landed, they came straight in. They pulled up and they pulled in so the rear of the airplane was ready to be backed into the Lockheed hangar, and the engines were still running. Well, the engines were putting out so much heat, it set off the deluge system in the hangar and almost drowned a couple of Lockheed guys in there. And of course, it set off the fire alarms. And our billeting was 8 miles from the flight line. And I had a vehicle, but I got my uniform real fast. I had my line badge. I was good for everywhere on Edwards main base, not north base, but south base, and the rocket stand over. We call it Mount Ugly, on the other side of Rogers Dry Lake. And so I didn't see it that day, that Saturday, because I had worked so much overtime. I was given a couple of days, 3 days off, and I was I'd heard the airplane, but I hadn't seen it. So on March 10th. I'm at the Northrop hangar, and I'm waiting they had a Piaggio. I think it was a gull wing pusher prop executive transport type. I think 10 passengers, maybe 12, plus the pilot and co-pilot. And we're just waiting. And across the taxiway was the Northrop X-21 laminar flow aircraft. There was a B-66 that they put a laminar flow wing on it and jet pods like the DC-9. That was across there. And also, I mean, you name the weird airplane, I saw it fly or saw it crash, one of the two. So I hear this roar, and I went running down the flight line, the taxiway, and I looked towards the XB-70 test pad, and there I thought was the X-15, fire coming out of the back of it, but the people were too small. So all of a sudden they say, hey, we're loading the airplane. So I ran back up. We got in. We taxied down and took off over Rogers Dry Lake. And we came over and we banked over it where I'm looking straight down on this incredible black monster, the Blackbird. They'd already shut it down. And they were towing a C-130 in front of it so you can get a relative size. I knew how big a C-130 was. And I'm looking at this thing, and I can't believe my eyes. So I was gone all that week. That next Monday, I come into the section. I get my work orders. It is for the Lockheed hangar. So I go over there, and I go through security, going through the back of the hangar, and I go into the hangar area. And here I'm an 18-year-old kid who joined the Air Force because I love airplanes. I mean, I'm nuts about airplanes. And here I'm looking at Buck Rogers airplanes, 2 of them. I'm standing at the back of 2 YF-12A interceptors. And I couldn't believe what I was looking at. About a week or 2 weeks later, I had set orders to go TDY from my TDY location to an unnamed location they would fly me to. I was to install some equipment with 2 other guys, spend the day there and come back. I didn't know where it was at the time, but I flew into Area 51 in a Fairchild F-27. They had the windows were blocked. You couldn't look. They didn't. They were. They may even been painted over. I'm not sure. I can't remember. It's only been almost 60 years. So we pulled up next to a hangar. We were told not to look around. We're still in the desert. And I'm familiar enough with Area 51 now to know that I was at Area 51. Mm-hmm. Went into the hangar, was there for about 5 hours, installing the equipment, testing it. And they had counterparts in the communication group that were assigned to Area 51. They were actually setting up the equipment. We were just verifying that everything was coming back and working, the instrumentation was working correctly. And then we got back in the F-27, 90 minutes, and we were back at Edwards. So I snuck in there back in the early 90s. I was in about 3 miles from the north end, and it was 30 degrees. And I probably sweated a gallon of sweat because I was just so, on edge, I guess the best way to put it. Right. So, but Area 51 is an incredible place. I was one of the first people to go up to top the White Sides Mountain and photograph it. First time I went up I was with John Lear, and my dear friend John Lear just passed away in his sleep. I think official date of his death is March 29th, 2022. And he was 79. He would have been 80 in early December. I'd known John Lear since about 1974. And he is the craziest SOB I've ever run into in my life. And you talk about a guy with the right stuff. I mean, he flew for Continental Air Service for 14 years, and Continental Air Service was a subsidiary of Air America. Okay. And they gave him 2 personal things when he was flying. He had a 24-karat gold Rolex watch and a 24-karat gold ID bracelet. Each one weighed 1.1 pounds. So he had a kilo of 24-karat gold, not 18 karat, and its stuff is soft. But he had ID bracelet, Lear, and then his Rolex. Wow. And over the years, he had to quit wearing the ID bracelet because it was giving him arthritis because it was so heavy. And same with his watch. And his daughter Allie has those now. And he was to the the UFO community he was like a real pathfinder. He was a little bit on the crazy side at times, and he had a sense of humor that you could think that he was so pissed off at you, he wanted to murder you. I mean, foaming at the mouth, shaking. He's so mad his eyes are this big. And then you'd see this twinkle in his eye. You realize, oh, that SOB, he's pulling my leg. And then I'd say, Lear, you SOB. And then he started laughing. I got you again. And I'm going to miss that. And John Lear was a one of a kind. There isn't anybody like him. He was type rated in over 50 aircraft types. He, upon his death on March 29th, 2022, he still was the holder of 16 FAI world records. On his 16th birthday, he flew around the world. He had an FAI observer with him, but it was a solo flight. He flew around the world on his 16th birthday in his dad's Learjet. Huh. But he also had a problem. he lived in extreme pain most of his adult life because he was in, I know 2 for sure, and I think 3 crashes, airplane crashes, when he was young. One of them, he was doing an aerobatic loops,
Mm-hmm.
and he miscalculated his height. And let's go over here. Let's say this is the rudder paddle. This is his foot. When he hit the ground, his feet just literally collapsed, and his toes bent around the rudder pedals, where his toes basically touched his heels. So he shattered all the bones, all the small bones in both his feet. And so for most of his adult life, he suffered from incredible pain. And when I saw him in 2015, I didn't think he'd make it through the end of the month.
Mm-hmm.
And he did, thanks to probably his daughter,
Mm-hmm.
2 of his daughters. He was in so much pain that the doctors were prescribing a lethal dose of oxycodone type of medication for the pain, and he was sleeping for 4 or 5 days at a time, up for a couple hours, then crash, boom, he's down again.
Mm-hmm.
His daughters finally felt that if they didn't do something, he would die.
Mm-hmm.
So they convinced him to go to try holistic medicine. So they got him off all of his opioids and put him on natural path type of herbs and spices and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to get completely off of all the nasty narcotics they used to keep his feet, keep him from dying of pain. Multiple times he said he was going to cut his feet off because and just go with stumps.
Right.
Athletes do it, and so, but never did. And I saw him last November, and he was so weak that he couldn't even reach across his desk to shake my hand.
Wow.
And I felt bad, but he was still the same crazy jerk that he was way back when. So it is.
When we think about Area 51, I mean, what everybody automatically thinks of is hidden spaceships and stuff like that. I mean, nothing was going on like that to your knowledge, right?
No. And Dave Fruhoff, who was the SR71 pilot that chased a UFO,
right,
when he retired in 1979, he got a job. He became facility manager at Area 51. He was there for about 5 years. And he knew almost everybody that was there.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't go ask questions. You're working in a environment where you need a Q clearance or higher to even be there, even as a janitor. I mean, you really had to have your background really checked.
Mm-hmm.
And once I said, after he was there about a year, he at the club, everybody went to it, regardless of what your rank was. He asked a couple of guys that he knew had been there for a long time. Hey, did we ever fly anything out of here that could beat the pants off an SR-71? I mean, like times 4 or 5 times faster? Everybody said no. So he figures he chased a real honest to goodness UFO.
Mm-hmm.
And but because of John Lear, my friendship with Lear, I was one of the first people outside the Air Force or Lockheed to photograph the F-117. They had announced the existence of the F-117 in November of 89 or 88, excuse me. The B-2, I think, was on the 11th, and the F-117 was on the 22nd, or vice versa. And I was in Las Vegas. It was the first week of January of 1989, and I'm over visiting John Lear, and he said, "Well, let's go up to Tonopah and see what we can see up at the the other end of the test site." So we jump in my car, my rent-a-car. We're heading north on US 95. We're just north of Scotty's Junction, and Scotty's Junction is sort of infamous. It was one of the multiple places in the state of Nevada that had a legal house of ill repute, better known as a cat house or a whorehouse.
Yeah.
But they hadn't paid all their taxes, so the federal government took it over, and they ran it into the ground. I don't know how that's humanly possible, but they ran it into the ground. But that's neither. So about 10 miles north of Scotty's Junction on US 95, we're just cruising at 75 miles an hour, and right in front of us, cutting across the road at about 1,500 feet was an F-117. I about crashed the car. I mean, you talk about something that was exciting. So we go into Tonopah, we grab a quick bite, we head out east on US 6. You go about 14 miles, the big sign, Tonopah Test Range. So we turn down that road, you go down 18 miles, you run into the main gate. You can see where the man camp is, but I can't get on the base because it's a restricted area. So we just go along the north end of the fence line, and we're public lands, and we're looking down on the entire base. And you can, any one of your listening audiences can do the same thing today. You're not be in any trouble. They may try to harass you out of the area, but you're on public lands.
Mm-hmm.
So we drive down about 2 miles down the fence line, and you can see the whole base at Tonopah Test Range. And I'm getting really excited. And I look to the north, and there's a big black fuzzy ball with a light on the bottom and a little small bluish white with a light on the bottom. Figure, well, it's got to be an F-117 and a chase airplane. And sure as shooting it was. Now, this is 89. This is before there were digital cameras.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, I shot with Kodachrome, either 25 or 64. But it takes 10 days to get it processed. You send it to Findlay, Ohio. You buy the mailers. You send it to Findlay. They process it, and they mail it back to you. So I'm using print film, Kodacolor 100. I had a Nikon. I had a really good telephoto lens. And I'm up there already. I have 36 exposures, and this airplane's coming into view. And as it's getting closer, my whole body is starting to vibrate. I was like a 10-year-old boy seeing a naked woman for the first time. I almost couldn't breathe, and I'm shooting, and it was, I have it focused, but my body's shaking so much I didn't know if anything was going to turn out. So soon it went by us. We waited for it to touch down, pop the chute, and said, "Let's get back to Vegas. We can go to a photo mat so I can get this film processed." So we jump in the car. We head back to US 6. We go to Warm Springs, turn down the extraterrestrial highway. It wasn't called that yet.
Mm-hmm.
And we stopped at the Little Alien. I think in 1989, it was still the Rachel Bar and Grill. Joe and Pat Travis hadn't changed the name of it yet. Because the first time I was there, first time I was at Little Alien, which turned out to be the Little Alien. It was in 87. And you talk about middle of nowhere. That's the middle of nowhere. So we stop in Rachel. We grab a bite at the Little Alien. Visit with Joe and Pat Travis. Then we head off to Vegas. And I knew we were going to get there after the photo mats were closed. And if you don't have white hair on top of your head, if you have hair, you probably don't know what a photo mat is.
Oh,
Basically, where there are coffee baristas selling coffee, there used to be a thing called a photo mat where you go by and drop off your film, pick it up the next day or 2 days later, and that's how you processed it.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew all the photo mats would be closed. That means I got to wait 2 or 3 days to get the film, and I'm really not happy, but I'm thrilled to have. I saw it with my own eyes. So we get to Lear's house. It's about 9:15 p.m. And he said, "I have a friend coming over. He just moved here from Albuquerque. He worked at Sandia, and he's interviewing for a job out in the desert. He doesn't know what or where, but it's out in the desert." So about 10 minutes after we got there, the doorbell rings. Lear goes down to the door, brings this nice, young man into his study. And if anybody here has ever been in John Lear's study, it is a place to behold. It's messy, but there's no room to put anything else on the walls. And it's probably a 25 by 25 foot room. And you had to work your way around because there's so much stuff. It's almost like a mini museum. So John goes down to there. The guy comes in and introduces himself as Bob Lazar. He just moved here from Albuquerque. So I told him what we had just done, and I told him that I was frustrated because I have to wait till tomorrow to get my film processed. And he said, well, I have a C41 processing unit at home because he went film processing for realtors.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, he was always good at making money doing something. So he said, well, I live over West Charleston. Let's jump in my car. Let's go process your film, see if it needs good. So we jump in the car. We're about a block from Lear's place. And he looks at me. He says, I feel sorry for that dumb SOB Lear. I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, jackass, he's from the world famous aviation family. I mean, his dad brought a Learjet to the world. And this SOB believes in UFOs.
Huh.
He says, I'm a nuclear physicist. If I can't prove it mathematically or put my hands on it, it doesn't exist. And said, you couldn't put a gun to my head to convince me that UFOs were real. Well, about a year later, he was silhouetted head with the name of Jared talking about doing reverse engineering on alien spacecraft at a place called S4. And so I've been friends with Bob Lazar since January of 1989. And we're having a gathering. I got Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, the UFO Garage guys, and a bunch of others. We're all meeting on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th at the Gold Nugget. Saturday is going to be for the public to come and Q&A. There's going to be about 15 of us who do what I do. So we'll be able to answer almost any question anybody has. And apparently it's doing it. A lot of people have signed up for it. And then from there, I'm going to go visit a friend of mine who's director of engineering at Virgin Galactic at Mojave. And that Monday night, I'm going to be at Sonny Conway's place on the Paranormal Chop Shop. And I was there last year, and we were on the air for 5.5 hours. And I finally had to quit because I lost my voice. And then from there, I go up to Beale Air Force Base, and on April 27th, I'm giving a presentation on the history and development of the Blackbird to the officers and senior NCOs at Beale Air Force Base, which I find ironic as hell. I mean, I was escorted off Beale a couple of different times because I was asking too many questions and taking pictures. and 30 years later, almost 40 years later, I'm back giving a presentation to these guys who have never seen an SR71 fly. The last SR left Beale in March of 1990.
I'm sad.
And
incredible plane. It's like you say, it doesn't look as big in the sky as it does when it's on the ground. When I saw it on the ground, I couldn't believe how big an airplane it was.
It's as big as a DC-9.
Yes.
And the A-12 only carried one guy. The rest of it's fuel.
Yes.
An SR-71 can overfill it with 13,000 gallons of JP7. And it'll go through at least 80,000 pounds of that, or close to 9,000 gallons in an hour and 15 minutes. But you've already gone over 3,000 miles. I mean, everything about the Blackbird is one of a kind. Everything about the Blackbird is unique. It has no peers anywhere in the world. The Russians say, our MiG-25 could catch it. Yeah, you could try to catch it, but you burn out the engines after about 90 seconds. And literally the engines are garbage after that. I said, well, the Foxhound, the MiG-31, it could catch it. Well, you have to know where it's at first.
Mm-hmm.
Most radars, you're looking down here. He's flying up there. So if you're not looking up there, and back when it was operational, most surface to air missiles were boost glide. So you're going from the equivalent of sea level to 85,000 feet. You have a 5-second window to see this lock on launch. And because there's virtually no air up there, you have to hit the airplane. Overpressure cannot damage the SR-71 or the A-12. If your computers were quick enough, and they weren't back then, where you could shoot in front of it, that blow up a fragmentation type warhead where you have a lot of metal debris where you can FOD the engines or the inlet or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't exist back then.
How accurate were the cameras on there? When they took photos down, because I know there's stories about being able to take a picture of a card, the face card of a card deck with the U2s and how clear it was.
When I was stationed at Lowry Air Force Base, they had the photo interpretation school at Lowry, and everything in there was secret and above. But I was putting some equipment in there. I had access to everything at Lowry, like I did at Edwards and at Elmendorf and whatever. They had an exhibit in the hallway. It was from a U2, which used a similar type camera as the Blackbirds used. And it showed a picture of Russia, Soviet Union. You can see the Moscow River. You can sort of make out Red Square. This is all from the same negative. The next shot, it's blown up. You can see it's Red Square. You can see the Kremlin. You can barely make out cars. The next frame, they blew it up again. You can actually make out cars, and you can see people. The fourth frame, you can see there's some guy sitting on a park bench reading a newspaper. And the final one is the newspaper. It had 8-inch headlines, but you can read them. This was 1962.
Wow.
And it was from a non-classified system. They say, and I don't know for sure, but the A-12 cameras were much better than the SR cameras. The SR cameras, only had to be able to tell a T-72 from a T-80 Russian tank, main battle tank. But with either the Type 1 or the Type 4 camera, it was either ITAC or Kodak. The Perkins-Elmer was also one of them. They had 19-inch wide film. The camera weighed 830 pounds, and it fit in the Q bay where the reconnaissance systems operator flew in an SR-71. That Q bay was pressurized and refrigerated, and that's where the camera was. And they could read your baseball cap from 80,000 feet if you were outside.
That's crazy.
And that is ancient technology.
Yeah,
Most anything that our government releases today is probably 8 to 10 years old or older.
Yeah, you can imagine what it looks like now. The other thing I was going to say is that, with Area 51, with stealth technology, I can see how people at night would mistake those planes for UFOs. I mean, I live probably about 4 miles from McClellan here, where they were doing repairs on planes.
Yeah, I was there 3 different times.
Yeah, and they would bring the stealth, the stealth stuff in at night.
Yeah,
especially the wing. I used to call it the flying wing, but they would bring the wing in, and there were no lights on there except for what was on the wings. The little running lights, and you could think, by seeing that thing come in, because all you saw was black, and then the lights. You would think that it's something out of this world.
Yeah. Well, the first time I saw the F-117, when I wasn't shaking, I thought the airplane was changing shape. The sun was going down. It's faceted, so the light was changing. And if you look at an F-117 head on, it's a classic UFO shape.
Yes.
If you look at it head on.
Yes.
And the other thing, Ben Rich said that the F-117 was the best flying, the best handling of any airplane that he'd ever been involved in. But because it's faceted and because it's ugly, and the nickname for it was the cockroach.
it
looks like
it had a weird shape to it.
Yeah. No, I have pieces and parts of an F-117. I have pieces and parts of crashed Blackbirds and XB-70. And I have an incredible collection of Blackbird instruments. They've all gone at least Mach 3.2.
That's great.
And one of these days, I haven't done. I have a Blackbird fanatic friend of mine who lives in Louisiana, Ron Gerard. He wants my A12 triple display indicator and my stabilization augmentation box that came out of one of the M21s. And I told him, I said, well, you better inherit a lot of money because these aren't going to be cheap because eventually I'm going to sell them. And right. God forbid, if something happens to my sweet wife, I would end up selling the house eventually. I have a rescue German Shepherd dog. And as long as Scarlett is around giving me loves and licks, well, I will always keep the house regardless of what happens. But my wife has been battling cancer. And she had emergency brain surgery here on February 25th. She had a brain aneurysm and a malignant brain tumor that they got it out, but she's going through X-ray treatment right now, radiation treatment. Uh-huh. But she had her right kidney removed 3 years ago because it was cancer. So it's one of the things you got to live with. But I live here in the greater Tucson area. I was born and raised in the Bay Area. I'm a class of 1963 of Los Altos High School, right in the heart of Silicon Valley. Uh-huh. And you couldn't give me enough money to move back there. It's just too nuts. Now I lived in Hawaii for 4 years. I was the associate curator at the Pacific Aviation Museum in Pearl Harbor. That was my fun job. And then when I retired, I got married again, and my wife and I ended up here in the beautiful town of Oro Valley, Arizona. It's a suburb of Tucson, and I love it here. It's hot in the summer, but I don't shovel snow. I lived in Minnesota for 27 years. I've been I've stationed in Alaska, stationed in Denver. I see my share of snow. I don't ever want to shovel snow again. But I would possibly, if it was just me, I don't know if I can move back with my son. I love him to pieces, but he's born and raised, and he's a Minnesotan through and through. I would possibly go back to Hawaii. And I have a place. I've already been told that, hey, we'll set you up in a place to live. That's the Cousin brothers, Blake and Brent Cousins. I was just them this weekend. I was with Dr. Stephen Greer had an event there in Fountain Hills, Arizona, one of the Indian casinos. They had 700 people in there, and it was talking about the release of Above Top Secret, their expose on things that go bump in the night. Where I'm, Michael Schratt was there. Michael's a dear friend of mine. And Michael Schratt, John DeSouza, and I are the three primaries talking heads in the Cousin Brothers, Dr. Greer UFO Above Top Secret. Uh-huh. Above Top Secret. So I've seen bits and pieces of it. I just got home from the function yesterday, and I slept all day yesterday. And today I'm scrambling to get everything ready for the tax man.
Go.
But that sort of covers it. And we've been going
2 hours.
2 hours.
I could talk to you all night, but I can't.
Yeah, I could too. But this
has been absolutely a blast. I would love to have you come back on sometime.
Anytime.
that's a possibility because there's still so much more I want to ask you. You know, I haven't talked to anybody about airplanes in like 12 years since my dad died.
Oh, geez.
Because he and I used to have these long conversations about different planes, and I think the SR71 was his favorite because, like I said, when we saw
it's everybody's favorite.
they turned that bad boy like straight up. He'd never seen anything go straight up like that before.
Yeah.
The flame shot out the back and stuff and went, you know. So that really got him when they did that. The other one, Instagram is running a lot of military plane photos. And it was funny because they had a V-52 Stratofortress on yesterday. And the guy, and then the caption was, well, what plane is this? And it's fun to read the captions because you get the ones that say it changes civilization and all this. And I get on there and I'm like, yeah, but what you don't realize, young'un, is that whisper mode. When you see that thing come over and it's so quiet because by the time you hear it, it's already dropped its payload.
Yeah, I mean it's moving away from you at 3,200 feet per second.
Yeah.
That's hauling butt. That's hauling butt.
As big as that thing is, it is just silent when it comes over. It's spooky, but
now,
it's really cool.
Just so you know, you probably came to that conclusion in our 2 hours here. I don't give yes or no answers. It's always cracked me up. I would be asked an answer, and I'm still giving the answers. Oh, we have to go to break. So come back from break, and I'm still answering the first question.
There you go.
Yeah, so that's fun. Hey, I had a wonderful time. I'm more than happy to come back.
Absolutely, I will definitely get you back on because I just love talking. I love talking to you. I love it.
Super.
And Travis, you know.
Yeah, well, I used to stay at Travis when I'd be up in the Bay Area because everything else is so damn expensive.
Yeah.
This time I'm staying at Beale. As retired military, I can do that. So,
absolutely.
But I also have my Area 51 patch. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It was the one that was in Popular Science.
Yes. Oh, cool.
Yeah. Well, I had a bunch of the stickers made. So I'm going to go to base ops at Edwards. I'm going to go to base ops at Nellis and also at Beale. And I'm going to put these on their base op windows where they have all this, all the squadron stickers. There's going to be an Area 51.
There you go.
Groom Guy Lake Test Facility sticker.
All right. So, well, you have a good evening, and I will. Try to get back on again. This was great. I think you're a great guy, and wow, that's all I can say is wow.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm. I think it's really bright. I just shrunk the screen down. Yeah, so all of a sudden I turned into chalk man here. So
out now.
All right. So I have to go eat and be nice to my wife. Yeah, okay. You have a wonderful evening. You have a great week, what's left of it.
Okay.
And until the next time, you light up the airwaves and give the world answers that they're asking for.
There we go.
All right?
Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on. Have a good one.
Right. Yeah, you take care. Thanks for everything. I enjoyed it.
I did too. Thank you, sir. Wow, that's all I can say about that. Like I said, I haven't talked to anybody about airplanes since my father died, and it's something my dad and I would always do. In fact, what I didn't tell anyone was I actually flew on the Concorde from New York to London. That was an incredible trip. When we hit supersonic speed, and of course me and then the Concorde came to Sacramento, and because they were thinking about putting a runway in and all this was going on. I got photos of somewhere in my archives when I had like a normal camera and not a digital camera. Back in the old days, I have footage of the Concorde here in Sacramento. But anyway, I'm glad you guys stuck with me. I think we learned a lot about the SR71 Blackbird. I'm definitely going to get him back on because I have a lot of questions about other planes in like Area 51 and stuff. But I mean, it was incredible. It was more than I could have asked for, and I loved every second of it. Tomorrow night we're back on at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. We're going to be talking trauma. We're shifting gears. We're putting on the news reporter hat. So we're going to be talking about different types of trauma with Yvonne Smith. So she'll be with us tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. If you're watching from YouTube, please subscribe. There's a little ghost down in the bottom right-hand corner down there with a magnifying glass on and a Sherlock Holmes hat. Please press that button to subscribe. We've got more than 260 videos over there that you can check out of different topics. Like tonight, we're completely away from ghost hunting and stuff. Talked about secret airplanes, and tomorrow we're talking about trauma. So, we like to vary what we're doing. Also, my gosh, for the people who listen to my podcast, thank you, thank you, thank you. I knew we were going to catch on at some point. It was going to be a snowball thing, and it's happening. And it happened last month, and it's really happening this month. And our download numbers are huge right now. Huge. And I'm real excited about that. It's been an exciting last 3 days for me to watch those numbers. And so we've actually exceeded last month's numbers already, and we've got 3 weeks to go. So keep it up. Keep sharing the show with your friends and keep letting people know about us, because we're a darn good show, I think so. And as somebody once said, one of our loyal listeners once said, YouTube gives us no love. There's just no love from YouTube. But as far as the podcast goes, you guys are showing a lot of love, and I really, really appreciate it. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. Share it with your family, share it with your friends, whatever. Or even if you have enemies you can't stand, and you can't stand me, or you can't stand my show, share it with the enemies. Okay? Because we're trying to spread the word about this show. It's a good show. We're like the little engine that could. We keep plugging along, and it's a good show. And I want to get the word out about it. You can check us out at CaliforniaHauntsRadio.com. Or if you're interested in our paranormal services, you can check us out at CaliforniaHaunts.org, right? Okay. And again, please do, if you're watching from YouTube, please do subscribe. I got a little ticker running at the bottom. All our services are free as far as being a paranormal investigation team. Everything's free that we do. And because of that, technically, everything was out of my pocket, whether it's equipment or stuff for the show, computers, paying for the internet here, paying for the StreamYard service, RSS, for the podcast and all that. It all comes out of my pocket. So if you could help me out a little bit with that, I would really appreciate it. You can do that at paypal.me/CaliforniaHaunts. Or if you're uncomfortable with PayPal, you can go to Venmo and just type in California Haunts and do it from there. I'd really appreciate it, because I love this show. I love bringing it to you. I love having it, bringing these different guests to you. And it's what I do. I'm a journalist. Photojournalist. It's my thing. I love to interview people. So if you could find it in your heart to donate and help us out and keep this thing going on the air and make it a little easier on me, on the bills, that would be great. Again, that's paypal.me/CaliforniaHaunts, or at Venmo, just type in California Haunts. Anyway, I want to thank you. And once again, let me get my little button set up here so I don't screw up the buttons. And thank you all for coming tonight. And again, tomorrow we will have Yvonne Smith on, and she will be talking about trauma. And the focus on her trauma, I believe, was people that were upset leading up to 911 and then following 911. But we're also going to talk about different types of trauma. So check it in tomorrow. We're going to have put on my news hat, my news reporter hat on, and talk with her about that. Anyway, thank you again, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a good one.